Moscow now, where our senior international correspondent Keir Simmons is standing by. So, Keir, do we have any sense of the mood among the Russian leadership about the progress their military is making so far in Ukraine?
Well, we know that they're frustrated because we've heard that from sources in the US and in Western governments who are monitoring, and also because we can see the way that the Russians are changing their tactics. And I think that's clearly an expression of the frustration felt at the very top with President Putin. We did hear from Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, today responding to the State of the Union speech, and particularly to the claim by President Biden that the economy here is shaking. He says, and he admits, and this is interesting, that the Russian economy is now experiencing a serious blow, but he says there is a margin of safety and we will stay on our feet. Now, of course, as you can imagine, the State of the Union overnight, Russians didn't stay up overnight to watch, but you can also imagine that the 6,800 people who've been arrested for protesting, the more than 1 million who have signed petitions for peace, that those people, I suspect, would have liked to have seen President Biden devote the entire speech to the situation in Ukraine, to the battle between democracy and autocracy, and it was uncomfortable to watch as that speech segued into domestic politics, more traditional speech, and some stood up and some sat down, but that is democracy. And the difference, of course, is that in the West and in the US, you're allowed to have different opinions. Here, overnight, while that speech was happening, President Putin's government closing down an independent TV station, an independent radio station, threatening Wikipedia with Russian Wikipedia with closing it down simply because of its post about the invasion of Ukraine.
Keir, let's talk more about President Biden's State of the Union last night. He took aim at Putin and Russia's oligarchs during that address. He said Putin underestimated the West's response. Do we have any clues as to whether pressure has been building on Putin from his inner circle or from Russian business leaders as a result of all these sanctions we've seen over the last week?
Well, the pressure is, you can see it in the statements that are being made by oligarchs, carefully calibrated. There are different kinds of oligarchs. There are oligarchs, and those, of course, are Russian billionaires. There are oligarchs who live primarily in Russia and others who live overseas. The idea that those people, though, can get close to President Putin, kind of talk him round, if you like, well, that's a fantasy. There is, of course, pressure on the country as a whole, and that, may have an effect over the long term. Here's the thing, though, that I think may have the most effect, and it isn't President Biden speaking to Congress, the American people, and the world on television, and maybe some of those comments reaching people here in Russia. Here's one of the things I think might have a real impact. Those sieges of the cities in Ukraine. The Russian people have the siege of a city seared into their historic memory. That was the siege of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, in the Second World War. 1.5 million people died. Now, if we start to see terrible scenes from those cities in Ukraine, well, then I think that may have an impact on public opinion here.
Keir, real quickly, I want to ask you, Russian media reports said that round 2 of ceasefire talks could come as early as today. Do we know if there's any progress on that front?
We do hear from the Russians that they say that their delegation to talk are ready and are getting ready. We don't know what the situation is with the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have said they want to see the bombing stop, the conflict stop before they talk again. But even in a war, contact can be helpful, even if to just deconflict in some places. So I suspect you will see talks at some stage.
All right. Keir Simmons reporting from Moscow.